She stood in a Memphis heat with an eviction notice crumpled in her purse and her daughter's hand trembling in hers, staring at the auction listing for a mansion nobody wanted. But when this struggling waitress paid her last $1,200 for Elvis Presley's forgotten Memphis estate, she had no idea that behind the sealed music room door lay $320 million in lost recordings, personal treasures, and secrets that would change everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The Memphis summer pressed down like a wet blanket, thick and suffocating. Sarah Mitchell stood outside Beale Street Diner, watching the tourists flow past with their cameras and expensive sunglasses, people who could afford to be here, people who belonged. At 35, Sarah looked older, the kind of older that comes from night shifts and worry and raising a daughter alone in a city that had stopped caring about people like her. Her blonde hair, always pulled back in a practical ponytail, showed more gray than it should. Her hands, rough from years of waiting tables and cleaning hotel rooms, never stopped moving, never stopped working, never stopped trying to hold together a life that kept threatening to fall apart. Inside her worn canvas bag was an eviction notice. 30 days. That's all she had. 30 days to come up with $1,800 in back rent, or she and her 11-year-old daughter Emma would be on the street. In Memphis, in August, with nowhere to go. Sarah had moved to Memphis 6 years ago, chasing a dream that had died quickly. She wanted to be a singer, had a voice that people said gave them chills, the kind of voice that belonged on stages and in studios. But dreams didn't pay rent. Dreams didn't feed children. Dreams didn't matter when you were a single mother with no connections and no money and no luck. So she put away the guitar, stopped going to open mic nights, and started waiting tables. First at the diner, then at a hotel restaurant downtown, then picking up weekend shifts at a bar on Beale Street. 3 jobs, 70 hours a week. And still, she was always behind, always scrambling, always one car repair or sick day away from disaster. Emma was everything. Smart, sensitive, with Sarah's blue eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room. She loved music like her mother did, would sit for hours listening to old records Sarah had collected, asking questions about the singers, about the stories behind the songs. Sarah had bought her a small keyboard last Christmas, saved for months to afford it, and Emma played it every day, teaching herself melodies by ear. But Emma had also learned to be small, to not ask for things, to understand when Mama said they couldn't afford it. She'd learned to wear shoes with holes in them and pretend they were fine. She'd learned to pack the free crackers from restaurants in her backpack for snacks. She'd learned that birthday parties cost money they didn't have. At 11 years old, Emma had learned to carry weight no child should carry. And that broke Sarah's heart more than any eviction notice ever could. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the heat shimmered off the pavement and made everything look like a mirage, when Sarah saw it. She was on her lunch break, sitting in the diner's back office with a cup of coffee and the local newspaper someone had left behind. She flipped through absently, not really reading, just trying to cool down before her next shift started. Then she saw the headline, "Historic Presley Properties Auctioned Off. Hidden Estate Fails to Attract Buyers." Sarah's hand stilled. She read the article twice, then 3 times, her heart beginning to pound. Elvis Presley's family estate, not Graceland, but a smaller mansion Elvis had bought in 1966 for his extended family, had been sitting empty for decades. The property, known as Harmony House, had fallen into disrepair after Elvis's death. Legal battles between distant relatives had kept it tied up in probate for years. Now, finally cleared for sale, it was being auctioned off by the county to recover unpaid property taxes. The article described the mansion as structurally sound but severely neglected. 42 rooms spread across 12,000 square feet. Original fixtures and furnishings still inside. Located in a once prestigious neighborhood that had declined over the decades. No electricity, no running water, overgrown grounds, and a reputation for being haunted that had scared off potential buyers. The starting bid, $1,000. Sarah stared at that number until it blurred. $1,000. For a mansion. For a piece of Elvis Presley's history. For a property that, even in disrepair, had to be worth something. Her mind started racing, doing math she'd done 1,000 times before. She had $1,247 in her checking account. That was supposed to cover Emma's school supplies, groceries for the month, and the phone bill. It was supposed to be untouchable, sacred, the buffer between survival and catastrophe. But what if? What if she could buy this house? What if they could live there, even without utilities at first? It would be better than being homeless. It would be shelter, a roof, walls, something that belonged to them. And maybe she could fix it up, sell it for enough to actually get ahead for once in her life. The auction was Saturday, 3 days away. Sarah read the article one more time, memorizing the address, the auction time, the terms. Cash or certified check only. All sales final. Property sold as is with no warranties or guarantees. She folded the newspaper carefully and tucked it into her bag. Her hands were shaking. This was crazy. This was the kind of desperate decision that ruined people. But she was already ruined, wasn't she? Already drowning. Maybe crazy was the only way out. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at their tiny kitchen table under the flickering fluorescent light and made lists. Pros and cons, risks and possibilities. The cons list was longer. No money for repairs, no guarantee the house was even livable, no idea what she'd find inside. The neighborhood might be dangerous. She'd be spending her last savings on a gamble. But the pros list had one entry that outweighed everything else: a home. A place no landlord could take away. A chance. She thought about Emma, sleeping in the bedroom they shared, curled up with the stuffed elephant Sarah had found at a thrift store when Emma was 3. Emma deserved better than moving from apartment to apartment, better than watching her mother work herself to exhaustion, better than poverty that felt like it would never end. Friday night, Sarah made her decision. She would go to the auction. She would bid. She would take the chance. Because what was the alternative? Keep working 3 jobs and still fall behind? Watch Emma grow up in shelters? Give up the one opportunity that might change their lives? Saturday morning arrived hot and cloudless. Sarah woke Emma at 7, made pancakes from a box mix, and tried to act normal. "We're going on an adventure today," Sarah said, keeping her voice light. "Where?" Emma asked, pouring syrup carefully, the way she did everything, aware that mistakes meant waste and waste meant money lost. "To look at a house. A really special house." Emma looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "Are we moving?" "Maybe. We'll see." Sarah drove her old Honda Civic through Memphis, following the directions she'd written down. The neighborhood where Harmony House sat had clearly seen better days. Large houses with overgrown yards, boarded-up windows, chain-link fences. But there were also signs of life. Children playing on porches, older folks sitting in lawn chairs, a community that existed despite the decline. And then she saw it. Harmony House sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, separated from the other properties by a wrought iron fence that had rusted through in places. The mansion was massive, 3 stories of red brick and white columns in the antebellum style popular in the South. Wide porches wrapped around the first floor. Tall windows, most covered by plywood, reflected nothing. The grounds were a jungle, kudzu and wild growth consuming what had once been manicured lawns. A fountain in the circular driveway stood dry and cracked, filled with leaves and debris. The whole property had an air of abandonment, of time stopped and forgotten. But Sarah didn't see decay. She saw potential. She saw home. The auction was being held on the front lawn. About 20 people had gathered, most of them looking like real estate investors or contractors, men in work clothes with clipboards and calculating expressions. Sarah felt out of place in her waitress uniform, Emma holding her hand tightly, both of them clearly not belonging. An auctioneer stood on the front steps, a thin man in a rumpled suit with a microphone. "All right, folks," he called out. "Let's get started. This is Harmony House, built in 1959, purchased by Elvis Presley in 1966 for his extended family. Property has been in probate for 43 years. County is selling to recover unpaid taxes totaling $287,000. Property is sold as is, all sales final, buyer responsible for all back taxes and fees." He paused, looking at the gathered crowd. Now, I'll be honest with you. This property has some history. Some folks say it's haunted. The Presley family stopped living here in 1972, and it's been empty ever since. Several attempts to sell or develop it have fallen through. Make of that what you will. A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah felt Emma press closer to her side. Haunted, Emma whispered. It's just a story, baby. Old houses always have stories. The auctioneer continued. Starting bid is $1,000. Do I hear 1,000? Silence. People shifted, whispered to each other, but no one raised a hand. Come on, folks. 12,000 square feet. Historic property. $1,000. More silence. Sarah felt her heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment. She raised her hand. 1,000. Every head turned. The auctioneer squinted at her. I have 1,000 from the lady in the back. Do I hear 1,500? A man in the front, heavy set with a contractor's logo on his shirt, raised his hand. 1,500. Sarah's stomach clenched. She hadn't expected competition. 2,000, she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. The contractor turned to look at her, sizing her up. Then he shook his head and stepped back. Too much work, he muttered to the person next to him. Place is cursed anyway. The auctioneer waited. I have 2,000. Do I hear 2,500? Anyone? 2,000 going once, going twice. He brought down his gavel with a sharp crack. Sold to the lady in the back for $2,000. Sarah couldn't breathe. Her hands trembled so badly, she almost dropped her purse. Emma looked up at her, eyes wide. Mom, did we just buy a house? I think we did, baby. I think we did. The paperwork took an hour. Sarah sat in a folding chair on the lawn while a county clerk processed the sale. She wrote a check for $2,000, watching her bank balance drop to nothing, and signed documents that made her head spin. Property deed, tax liability agreement, disclosure forms stating she understood the property was sold with no warranties. When she was handed the keys, a heavy iron ring with a dozen old-fashioned keys, it felt surreal. She owned a mansion. She and Emma owned a piece of Elvis Presley's history. They owned something no one could take away. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, leaned closer. Honey, you know what you're getting into here? This place has been empty since 1972. No power, no water, probably full of mold and vermin. And the stories. What stories? Sarah asked, though part of her didn't want to know. The clerk hesitated. People say Elvis's cousin, who lived here last, sealed off the music room before she left. Said there were things in there that needed to stay hidden. Said the house held secrets that were dangerous. She died in a mental hospital 3 years later, never said another word about this place. Sarah felt a chill despite the heat. That's just a story. People make up stories about empty houses. Maybe, the clerk said, but I grew up in this neighborhood. I remember when the Presleys lived here. I remember when they left. And I remember my mama telling me to stay away from this property. Said there was something wrong here. Something that didn't want to be disturbed. Sarah looked at Emma, who was exploring the overgrown garden, humming to herself. Well, Sarah said quietly, we don't have anywhere else to go. So whatever's in there, we'll face it together. The clerk nodded. You're brave. Or desperate. Either way, good luck. After the clerk left, Sarah and Emma stood in front of Harmony House, staring up at the massive structure that was now theirs. Can we go inside? Emma asked. Yes, but carefully. We don't know what we'll find. Sarah found the right key on the third try. The front door swung open with a groan of hinges that hadn't moved in decades. The smell hit them immediately. Dust, mold, decay, and something else. Something organic and old. But underneath that, Sarah caught a trace of something else. Perfume maybe, or old wood polish. The ghost of what this place had once been. The entry hall was grand. A sweeping staircase curved upward to the second floor. Crystal chandeliers, dark with grime, hung from the ceiling. The floor was marble, black and white checkered, covered in a thick layer of dust. Wallpaper peeled from the walls in long strips, revealing plaster beneath. But the bones of the house were solid. The architecture was beautiful. Crown molding, archways, built-in shelving. This had been a showplace once. They moved through the first floor slowly. The formal living room with furniture still arranged as if waiting for guests. The dining room with a table that could seat 20. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, most of the books still there, swollen with moisture and age. A kitchen that looked like it belonged in a museum, all vintage appliances and checkered linoleum. And everywhere, signs of the people who had lived here. Photographs on walls showing people Sarah didn't recognize, but who must have been Elvis's relatives. A child's toy car abandoned in a corner. A sweater hanging on a coat rack by the back door. Coffee cups still sitting on a side table in what looked like a den. It was as if the family had simply walked out one day and never returned. "Mom," Emma whispered, her voice small in the enormous space. "Why did they leave everything?" "I don't know, baby, but it's ours now. We can make it beautiful again." They climbed to the second floor. More bedrooms than Sarah could count, each one frozen in time. One room clearly belonged to a teenage girl. Posters of 1960s bands still on the walls, a vanity with makeup and perfume bottles covered in dust. Another room looked like it belonged to a little boy, toys and books scattered as if he'd just stepped out to play. The master suite was at the end of the hall, a massive room with a 4-poster bed and attached bathroom. Sarah opened the closet and found clothes still hanging, dresses from another era, shoes lined up neatly. It was eerie and sad and strangely beautiful all at once. The third floor was smaller, just a few rooms that looked like they'd been used for storage or staff quarters. But from the windows up here, Sarah could see all of Memphis spreading out below. The city lights beginning to twinkle as evening approached. Graceland visible in the distance. They were standing in Elvis Presley's forgotten mansion, looking out over the city he'd made famous, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt something like hope. As they descended back to the first floor, Sarah noticed a door she'd missed before. It was set back in an alcove off the main hall, painted the same cream color as the walls, almost invisible. She tried the handle. Locked. "What's in there?" Emma asked. Sarah examined the door more closely. It was heavy, solid wood, with a deadbolt that looked newer than the rest of the house's hardware. And across the door, written in faded marker, were words that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Music room. Do not open. For everyone's safety. JP 1972. Sarah's mind flashed back to what the county clerk had said. Elvis's cousin sealed off the music room before she left. Said there were things in there that needed to stay hidden. "Mom." Emma's voice was uncertain. "Maybe we shouldn't." Sarah looked at her daughter, saw the fear in her eyes, and made a decision. "Not today. We've seen enough for today. Let's go home, pack our things, and tomorrow we'll move in. We can explore more once we're settled." That night, back in their tiny apartment, Sarah lay awake long after Emma had fallen asleep. She thought about the sealed music room, about the warnings, about the stories of hauntings and secrets. She thought about the photographs of smiling families who had abandoned this beautiful house and never looked back. She thought about the inscription on the door, "For everyone's safety." But she also thought about the eviction notice, about the $2,000 she no longer had, about the fact that in 3 weeks they'd have nowhere to live unless they took this chance. The mansion was theirs. Whatever was behind that sealed door, they would face it, because Sarah Mitchell had spent her entire life being afraid, being careful, playing it safe, and where had it gotten her? Broke, evicted, desperate. Maybe it was time to be brave. Maybe it was time to stop running from the unknown and face it head on. Maybe, just maybe, what was behind that door wasn't danger at all. Maybe it was the answer she'd been looking for all along. The next day was Sunday. Sarah and Emma packed everything they owned into the Honda, which wasn't much. Clothes, Emma's keyboard, Sarah's old guitar she'd almost pawned a dozen times, books, kitchen supplies, bedding. It all fit in the car with room to spare. They drove to Harmony House in the morning light, the mansion looking less ominous in daylight, more like a tired old lady waiting to be cared for. Sarah had stopped at a hardware store and bought cleaning supplies, work gloves, trash bags, and a battery-powered lantern. She couldn't afford to turn on utilities yet, but they could clean, could make the place livable, could start. They spent the entire day cleaning one bedroom on the second floor. Sarah chose a room that faced east, with windows that let in good light. It had been a guest room, relatively sparse, which made it easier to clean. They scrubbed floors, wiped down walls, opened windows to air out decades of staleness. By evening, exhausted and filthy, they had one clean room with their sleeping bags spread on the floor, their belongings stacked neatly in a corner. Emma sat by the window, eating a peanut butter sandwich, looking out over the overgrown garden. "Mom, this is like a castle." Sarah joined her, putting an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "It is, isn't it? Our castle. Are we going to open the music room?" Sarah had been waiting for this question. "Eventually. But first, we make the rest of the house safe and clean. Then we'll see what secrets it's hiding." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and Emma fell into a routine. Sarah worked her shifts at the diner and hotel, coming home to Harmony House instead of the apartment they'd surrendered. Every spare moment was spent cleaning room by room. Emma helped after school, becoming braver as the house became familiar. They discovered beauty hidden under years of neglect. Original hardwood floors that gleamed once the dirt was scrubbed away. Stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the walls. Built-in cabinets filled with china and glassware, some of it marked with the Presley family crest. In the library, Sarah found books signed by Elvis himself, personal inscriptions to family members. In the attic, they discovered trunks full of clothes, costumes, and memorabilia. Sequin jumpsuits, leather jackets, photographs of Elvis with his family at Harmony House. Sarah handled everything carefully, documenting it with her phone, knowing these items had historical value. But she also found something else. In a small desk in what had been the master bedroom, she found letters. Dozens of them, handwritten from Elvis to his cousin Janet, the woman who had lived here last, the woman who had sealed the music room. Sarah read them by flashlight after Emma was asleep, and a story began to emerge. Elvis had bought Harmony House for his extended family, wanting them close but giving them privacy. Janet, his father's niece, had lived here with her 3 children. Elvis visited often, using the music room to write songs, to escape the pressure of fame, to be himself without the world watching. The letters were tender, funny, revealing a side of Elvis Sarah had never known. But the later letters from 1971 and early 1972 showed a change. Elvis wrote about feeling watched, about strange things happening at Graceland, about people trying to steal from him. He wrote about moving his most precious belongings to Harmony House for safekeeping, about trusting only Janet to protect them. The final letter, dated March 1972, just 5 years before Elvis's death, was different. "Janet, I know you think I'm being paranoid, but I'm telling you, people are after what I've got in that music room. Not just the recordings, but everything. If anything happens to me, you keep that room sealed. Don't let anyone in there. Don't let anyone know what's inside. It's not safe. Some of those tapes, some of those songs, they were never meant to be public. Promise me. Promise me you'll keep it locked until the time is right. I trust you. You're the only one I trust. Love, E." Sarah's hands trembled as she read. Recordings. Songs that were never meant to be public. Things precious enough that Elvis wanted them hidden. Things valuable enough that he feared people would come after them. What was in that music room? The next morning, Sarah stood in front of the sealed door again. She'd walked past it 100 times over the past 2 weeks, always pausing, always wondering. The warning was still there. Music room. Do not open. For everyone's safety. But Sarah had also done research. She'd learned that unreleased Elvis recordings could be worth millions. Collectors paid fortunes for authentic Presley memorabilia. And if there were truly songs in there that the world had never heard, recordings from Elvis's private sessions, the value could be astronomical. Sarah pulled out her phone and called the one person she thought might be able to help. Marcus Chun was a music historian at the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum. Sarah had met him months ago when she tried to sell an old guitar, and he'd been kind, had paid her fairly even though he probably knew she was desperate. "Marcus? It's Sarah Mitchell. I need your expertise with something." They met at Harmony House that afternoon. Marcus arrived in a beat-up Subaru, carrying a leather bag full of equipment. He was in his 50s, graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a Ramones t-shirt and jeans. He'd spent his life studying music history, particularly Elvis and the Memphis sound. When Sarah showed him the house, his eyes went wide. "My God, I've heard about this place. Harmony House. We always thought it had been demolished. The Presley estate never talks about it. Why not? Sarah asked. Marcus shook his head. Legal issues, family drama, embarrassment maybe. After Elvis died, his estate was a mess. Properties and assets scattered everywhere. Some things got lost in the shuffle. I guess this was one of them. Sarah led him to the music room door. Marcus read the inscription and went very still. Janet Presley wrote this. Elvis's cousin. She was one of the last people to see him alive. I found letters, Sarah said. From Elvis to Janet. He talks about moving precious things here. About recordings that were never meant to be public. About keeping the room sealed. Marcus's hand hovered over the door like he was afraid to touch it. Sarah, if what you're suggesting is true, if there are unreleased Elvis recordings in there, we're talking about potentially the most significant music discovery in decades. Elvis recorded constantly. He was paranoid about losing ideas, so he taped everything. But after he died, a lot of tapes disappeared. The estate claims they were destroyed or lost. But collectors have always believed some survived, hidden away. So they could be valuable. Sarah, a single unreleased Elvis song could sell for millions at auction. If there's a collection in there, if there are full sessions, alternate takes, private recordings, we're talking about something priceless. Not just monetarily, but culturally. This would be like finding lost Beatles tapes or unreleased Michael Jackson albums. Sarah's heart was pounding. Help me open it. Marcus hesitated. Are you sure? That warning is 50 years old, Sarah interrupted. Written by a woman who ended up in a mental hospital. I need to know what's in there, Marcus. I bought this house with my last savings. My daughter and I are living here without electricity or running water. If there's something valuable in that room, it could change our lives. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, let's see what we find. The door was sealed with 3 locks. 2 were standard deadbolts, but the third was a combination lock that had been installed over the handle. Sarah tried keys from the ring the county had given her. The first deadbolt opened easily. The second took longer, but finally turned with a click that echoed through the empty hall. The combination lock was the problem. Marcus examined it. This is a 1970s-era master lock. We could drill out, but that would take time and might damage what's inside if we're not careful. How else can we open it? We could try to crack the combination. These old locks, if you know the technique, sometimes you can feel the tumblers. Marcus pulled out a stethoscope from his bag, the kind doctors use, and pressed it against the lock. He began turning the dial slowly, listening intently. Sarah watched, barely breathing. After 10 minutes, Marcus smiled. Got it. The lock opened. They both stared at the door, now completely unsecured. Sarah's hand went to the handle. Ready? She asked. No, Marcus said honestly. But let's do it anyway. What happens next will turn Sarah's desperate gamble upside down, reveal a treasure beyond imagination, and remind us why sometimes the greatest fortunes are hidden in the places everyone else fears to look. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Sarah pulled the handle. The door swung open slowly, hinges protesting with a sound like a sigh. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of old leather and something electrical, like ozone after a storm. Sarah stepped inside, Marcus right behind her, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The room was smaller than Sarah expected, maybe 20 by 30 feet, but it was packed. Floor to ceiling shelving lined 3 walls, filled with boxes, equipment cases, and what looked like recording gear from another era. In the center of the room sat a professional recording setup, a massive reel-to-reel tape machine, a mixing board, microphones on stands, all covered in dust, but seemingly intact. But what made Sarah's breath catch were the tapes. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stored in archival boxes, labeled and dated, stacked with meticulous care. Marcus moved to the nearest shelf and pulled down a box, his hands trembling. He opened it carefully. Inside were reel-to-reel tapes in their original boxes, each one labeled in neat handwriting. March 1971, Graceland Sessions, private. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. Oh my God. He opened another box. December 1970, Gospel Songs, Personal Collection. Another box. January 1972, New Material, Do Not Release. Sarah moved deeper into the room. She found filing cabinets and opened the top drawer. Inside were master recordings, each one documented with session notes, dates, musicians present, and Elvis's own comments written in the margins. This one's too personal. Save for the right time. For family only. Mom, Emma's voice came from the doorway, making both adults jump. What's in here? Sarah had forgotten Emma was home from school. Her daughter stood in the doorway, eyes wide, taking in the room full of treasures. History, baby, Sarah said softly. We found history. Over the next 3 hours, they cataloged what they could see without disturbing too much. Marcus estimated there were over 800 reels of tape, representing potentially thousands of songs. Unreleased recordings, alternate versions, private sessions, gospel music Elvis sang for himself, conversations, rehearsals, and what appeared to be an entire concept album Elvis had been working on in 1972 that the world had never heard. But there was more. In locked cases against the far wall, Sarah found instruments. Elvis's guitars, including one Martin acoustic that looked like it had been played constantly, worn smooth with use. A piano with sheet music still on the stand, showing Elvis's handwritten notes and chord progressions. Costumes and garment bags, jumpsuits worth fortunes to collectors. Personal items, jewelry, watches, a Bible with Elvis's annotations, photographs of private moments never published. And in a safe built into the wall, which took Marcus another hour to crack, they found something that made Sarah's knees weak. Gold records, the original awards for Elvis's biggest hits, the ones that should have been at Graceland but had mysteriously disappeared. Contracts and legal documents. And cash, stacks of it, old $100 bills that had been sealed in waterproof bags. Marcus counted it with shaking hands. $40,000. Just sitting here for 50 years. But the most stunning discovery was in a leather portfolio at the bottom of the safe. Inside were handwritten lyrics to songs Sarah recognized, songs that had made Elvis a legend, in his own handwriting. The originals. The actual pages Elvis had written on. Marcus held them like they might disintegrate. These alone could sell for millions. Collectors pay fortunes for original handwritten lyrics by major artists. But Elvis Presley? These are museum pieces. Sarah sank down onto a chair, dust puffing up around her. How much? All of it together, how much? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his historian's mind calculating. Conservatively? If you sold everything through the right channels, authenticated properly, marketed to collectors and museums, you're looking at $320 million. Maybe more. The recordings alone are priceless. Some of these sessions, the estate doesn't even know they exist. You found the holy grail of Elvis memorabilia, $320 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. Sarah thought about the $2,000 she'd paid for this house, about the eviction notice that had started this journey, about every moment of fear and desperation that had led her here. I need to sit down, she said, though she was already sitting. I need to think. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat in the music room alone. She'd brought battery-powered lanterns, and in their warm glow, the room looked almost magical. She pulled out one of the reel-to-reel tapes at random, dated April 1971. Written on it in Elvis's handwriting, "Just me and my guitar for when I'm gone." Sarah had no way to play it, not without power, not without the right equipment. But she held it carefully, this piece of history, this recording of a man who'd been dead for nearly 50 years, but whose voice still moved the world. She thought about what Marcus had said. $320 million. Life-changing money. Enough to give Emma everything she'd never had. Enough to never worry again. Enough to save not just themselves, but potentially this entire neighborhood, this forgotten corner of Memphis that needed hope as much as she did. But Sarah also thought about the letters from Elvis, about his trust in Janet to keep these things safe, about the warning on the door, for everyone's safety, about the fact that this wasn't just treasure, it was legacy. These recordings, these personal items, they weren't hers by right. They were hers by accident of ownership, by a quirk of fate that had led her to a $2,000 auction. The question was what she would do with them. Her phone rang, making her jump. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello, Miss Mitchell? This is Catherine Presley. I'm Elvis's second cousin. I need to talk to you about Harmony House. Sarah's blood went cold. How did you get this number? That's not important. What's important is that you've opened the music room. I know you have. There are people watching the property. People who've been watching for 50 years, waiting for someone to finally unseal that door. What people? What are you talking about? The Presley estate never forgot about Harmony House. Never forgot about what Elvis hid there. They've been waiting for the property to finally sell so they could claim what's inside. They have lawyers, Miss Mitchell. Very good lawyers who will argue that everything in that music room belongs to the estate, not to you. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. I bought this property legally. Everything in it is mine. Is it? Read your deed carefully. Read the property sale agreement. There's a clause about cultural artifacts and items of significant historical value. The county didn't know about the music room, but the estate did. They've been preparing for this for decades. Sarah pulled out her copy of the property sale documents, hands shaking as she flipped through pages. And there it was, buried in the legal language. Buyer acknowledges that any items of historical or cultural significance discovered on the property may be subject to claims by original owners or estates. You're lying, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? The estate's lawyers will contact you within 48 hours. They'll offer you money, maybe $1 million, maybe two, to walk away quietly, to sign over everything in that music room and never speak about it again. And if you refuse, they'll bury you in legal fees until you have no choice. That's how this works, Miss Mitchell. That's how it's always worked. The line went dead. Sarah sat in the music room, surrounded by $320 million in treasures, and realized she'd just painted a target on her back. The next morning, Sarah called Marcus. I need help. Real help. The Presley estate knows about the music room. Marcus arrived within an hour, bringing someone with him. A woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed and professional, carrying a leather briefcase. Sarah, this is Rebecca Chon. She's an entertainment lawyer who specializes in music rights and estate law. I called her last night after I left. I had a feeling things were going to get complicated. They sat in the library, the only room Sarah had furnished with chairs rescued from other parts of the house. Rebecca spread out documents on a makeshift table. Tell me everything. Sarah explained it all. The auction, the sealed room, the discoveries, the phone call from Catherine Presley. Rebecca listened without interrupting, taking notes. When Sarah finished, Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Okay, she finally said. This is complex, but not hopeless. First, the good news. You legally own this property and everything in it. The clause about cultural artifacts is vague and would be difficult for them to enforce. However, she held up a hand as Sarah started to relax. The Presley estate is powerful and wealthy. They can afford to drag this out in court for years. They can make your life extremely difficult. So what do? You have 3 options. 1, you sell to them. Take whatever they offer, probably a fraction of the real value, and walk away. 2, you fight them in court. This could take years and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Money I'm guessing you don't have. 3, Rebecca paused. You negotiate. You find a way to work with the estate, to share the discovery, to ensure these recordings and items are preserved and shared with the world in a way that benefits everyone, including you. I don't understand. How would that work? Rebecca leaned forward. The estate wants to protect Elvis's legacy. They want control over what's released, how it's released when it's released. They're terrified of things getting out that could damage his reputation. But you want financial security and the recognition for making this discovery. What if there's a middle ground? What if you donate the most sensitive personal items to the estate or to a museum, but retain rights to the commercial recordings? What if you establish a foundation that oversees the release of new material, with both you and the estate having input? What if you become partners instead of enemies? Sarah's mind raced. Would they go for that? Maybe. especially if the alternative is a public court battle where everything comes out anyway. The estate values privacy and control. If you can offer them that while protecting your interests, we might have leverage. That afternoon, 3 black SUVs pulled up in front of Harmony House. Men in expensive suits emerged, carrying briefcases and wearing expressions that said they were used to winning. Sarah watched from the upstairs window, her heart pounding. Emma stood beside her. "Who are they, Mom?" "Lawyers. People who want to take away what we found." "Can they do that?" Sarah looked at her daughter. "Not if I'm smart. Not if I fight." She went downstairs and opened the front door before they could knock. The lead lawyer, a man in his 60s with silver hair and cold eyes, introduced himself. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Harold Grayson, representing the Presley estate. We need to discuss the contents of the music room." "I know who you are," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. "And I've already retained legal representation." She gestured to Rebecca, who had stayed at Sarah's request and now stood in the hallway looking every bit as professional as Grayson's team. Grayson's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see. Well then, let's speak plainly. The Presley estate is prepared to offer you $2 million for the contents of the music room and your agreement to never discuss what you found. And if I refuse, then we'll see you in court. We have resources, Miss Mitchell. Time, money, legal expertise. We can make this very uncomfortable for you." Sarah felt Emma behind her, felt her daughter's small hand slip into hers. She thought about backing down, about taking the $2 million and walking away. It was more money than she'd ever dreamed of. But then she thought about Elvis's letters, about his trust, about the music in that room that deserved to be heard, about standing up for herself for once in her life. "No," Sarah said quietly. "Those recordings, those items, they're not just valuable. They're important. They're part of music history. And I'm not going to let you bury them or control them or decide what the world gets to hear. Elvis left them here for a reason. He trusted his family to protect them. And now they're mine to protect." Grayson's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." After they left, Sarah collapsed onto the stairs, adrenaline draining away. Rebecca sat beside her. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly risky. They're going to come after you hard now." "I know, but I meant what I said. This isn't just about money. It's about doing right by Elvis's legacy and by myself. I've spent my whole life letting people push me around, taking whatever I could get, being grateful for scraps. Not anymore." Over the next week, Sarah's life became a media storm. Somehow the story leaked, probably from the estate, hoping public pressure would force her to sell. News vans camped outside Harmony House. Reporters called constantly. The headline was everywhere. "Single mother discovers $320 million Elvis treasure in forgotten mansion." Some articles painted Sarah as a hero, a struggling waitress who'd found the discovery of a lifetime. Others suggested she was greedy, trying to profit from Elvis's legacy. The estate's lawyers appeared on news programs, arguing that the recordings belonged to them, that Sarah was trying to steal from Elvis's family. But something unexpected happened. The public rallied behind Sarah. Music fans, historians, even other musicians spoke out, saying the recordings should be preserved and shared, not controlled by an estate interested only in profit. A crowdfunding campaign started to help with Sarah's legal fees, raising over $400,000 in 3 days. Marcus used his connections in the music world to bring in experts, archivists, and recording engineers who volunteered to help catalog and preserve the tapes properly. The story became bigger than Sarah, bigger than the estate. It became about access to art, about who owns culture, about the tension between protecting legacy and sharing history. Through it all, Sarah worked. She got electricity restored to Harmony House using money from the crowdfunding campaign. She hired a security company to protect the property. She allowed a team of archivists to begin the careful process of digitizing the reel-to-reel tapes, documenting everything, ensuring nothing was lost or damaged. And slowly, carefully, they began to listen to what Elvis had left behind. The first tape they played was dated December 1970, labeled Gospel Sessions Private. When Elvis's voice filled the room, singing a hymn Sarah's grandmother used to love, she wept. It was pristine, beautiful, raw with emotion. Elvis had been alone, just him and his guitar, singing for God and himself and no one else. "This is sacred," Marcus whispered. "This is what he was when the world wasn't watching." They found sessions where Elvis experimented with blues, with country, with rock and roll in its purest form. They found him talking between takes, telling stories, laughing, being human. They found the concept album he'd been working on in 1972, a collection of deeply personal songs about aging, mortality, faith, and fear. Songs he'd never felt comfortable releasing because they were too honest, too vulnerable. They found gospel songs he'd recorded in the middle of the night when he couldn't sleep. They found jam sessions with musicians whose names appeared in the session notes, informal recordings that captured genius in its most natural state. And in one tape, dated August 1972, they found Elvis talking directly to whoever might find these recordings. His voice was tired but determined. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. It means enough time has passed that maybe people are ready to hear me as I really was, not as they wanted me to be. These songs, these recordings, they're the truth. They're me without the costume, without the performance, without the myth. I'm leaving them here because I trust that when the time is right, someone will know what to do with them. Someone will understand that music isn't about fame or money or image. It's about truth, about connecting with something bigger than yourself, about being honest even when it hurts. Don't let them control this. Don't let them turn it into something it's not. Let people hear me as I was. That's all I ask. That's my legacy." Sarah listened to those words 3 times, and each time, she became more certain. This wasn't hers to sell. This was hers to protect and to share. 6 weeks after opening the music room, Sarah sat across from Harold Grayson in a mediation conference room in downtown Memphis. Rebecca sat beside her. The Presley estate had assembled a team of 6 lawyers. Between them was a proposal Sarah and Rebecca had drafted. "This is what I'm offering," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I will donate all personal items, jewelry, clothing, personal correspondence, and photographs to Graceland for public display. I will donate Elvis's handwritten lyrics and contracts to the Library of Congress for preservation. But I retain ownership of the recordings." Grayson started to object, but Sarah held up a hand. "Let me finish. I will establish the Harmony House Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and releasing these recordings properly. The foundation will have a board of directors that includes representatives from the Presley estate, music historians, and musicians. All decisions about what to release, when to release it, and how to market it will be made by the board collectively. Any profits from the recordings will be split 3 ways. 1/3 to the Presley estate, 1/3 to music education programs for underserved communities, and 1/3 to me as the discoverer and property owner. The estate gets control over how Elvis's image is used, gets input on all releases, and gets to protect his legacy. The world gets access to recordings they've never heard. And I get financial security and the knowledge that I'm using this discovery to help people the way I wish someone had helped me." The room was silent. Grayson looked at his team, then back at Sarah. "And if we refuse, then we go to court. And in the meantime, I start releasing recordings under fair use and cultural preservation arguments. The court case will take years, and in that time, the world will hear what's in that music room. You'll lose control either way. At least this way, you have a seat at the table." Grayson was quiet for a long moment. Then, to Sarah's shock, he smiled. "You're smarter than we gave you credit for, Miss Mitchell. You're offering us exactly what we want, control and legacy protection, while keeping what you need. And you're right. A public court battle helps no one." He stood and extended his hand. "We have a deal, pending approval from the estate executives, but I'll recommend they accept." Sarah shook his hand, barely believing what was happening. Really? Welcome to the music business, Miss Mitchell. Something tells me you're going to do just fine." The press conference announcing the agreement was held at Harmony House 3 weeks later. The mansion had been partially restored, the first floor cleaned and repaired, looking closer to its former glory. Media from around the world attended. Sarah stood at a podium in the grand entry hall, Emma beside her, and explained the deal. She talked about preserving Elvis's legacy while ensuring the public could access these historic recordings. She talked about using the profits to fund music education for kids like Emma, kids who loved music but couldn't afford lessons or instruments. She talked about second chances and unexpected blessings and the responsibility that came with discovering something precious. And then they played a recording, one of the songs from a 1972 concept album, one that the Presley estate had agreed could be released as a preview. Elvis's voice filled Harmony House for the first time in 50 years, singing a song no one had ever heard, a ballad about loss and hope and finding light in darkness. By the time the song ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The media storm that followed was intense, but different now. Sarah became a symbol of something hopeful, a reminder that sometimes desperate chances paid off, that sometimes integrity mattered more than immediate profit, that sometimes the right thing to do was also the smart thing. The first album of unreleased recordings dropped 6 months later. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts, sold over 2 million copies in the first week, and generated $47 million in revenue. Sarah's 1/3 share, after taxes and foundation expenses, was $11 million. She sat in the newly renovated music room at Harmony House, now a state-of-the-art recording studio and archive, and stared at the check. $11 million. From a $2,000 investment. From a desperate bid at an auction. From a sealed door everyone else had been too afraid to open. Emma, now 12, sat at the piano that had been Elvis's, playing a melody she'd written herself. She'd started taking formal lessons with some of the best teachers in Memphis, paid for by the foundation Sarah had established. "Mom," Emma said, looking up from the keys. "Are we rich now?" Sarah thought about the question. They'd moved into a restored wing of Harmony House permanently. They had security, stability, a future without fear. The foundation was funding music programs in underprivileged schools across Memphis. The remaining unreleased Elvis recordings would provide income for years to come. "We're secure," Sarah said carefully. "We're safe. We're blessed. And we have a responsibility to use what we've been given to help other people. That's what Elvis wanted. That's what we're going to do." "That's not what I asked," Emma said with a smile. "I asked if we're rich." Sarah laughed. "Yeah, baby. I guess we are." But as she said it, Sarah realized that wealth wasn't the check in her hand or the mansion around them, or even the fortunes still locked in secure storage waiting to be released. Wealth was Emma playing piano without fear of the cost. Wealth was sleep without nightmares of eviction. Wealth was knowing that she'd faced down powerful lawyers and a powerful estate, and had found a way to win by refusing to play their game. Wealth was standing in Elvis Presley's music room, surrounded by his legacy, knowing she'd honored it while protecting her own future. The story of Harmony House and the lost Elvis recordings became legendary. Documentaries were made. Books were written. Sarah was invited to speak at conferences about preservation, about music history, about taking chances. But she never forgot where she'd started. Every year on the anniversary of buying Harmony House, Sarah held a free concert at the mansion, open to anyone from the neighborhood. Local musicians played. Food was provided. Kids from the foundation's music programs performed. And at sunset, Sarah would stand on the front porch, look out at the crowd gathered on the lawn, and remember the terrified woman who'd spent her last $2,000 on a house nobody wanted. That woman had been brave. That woman had been desperate. That woman had opened a door everyone else feared and had found not just treasure, but purpose. 5 years after the discovery, Sarah stood in the music room with Marcus, who'd become not just an advisor but a friend. They were preparing to release another collection of recordings, carefully curated, beautifully produced, honoring Elvis while sharing his genius with the world. "You know," Marcus said, "you've probably done more for Elvis's legacy than anyone since he died. These recordings, the foundation, the way you've handled everything. He'd be proud." Sarah touched one of the reel-to-reel tapes, still carefully preserved in its original box. "I hope so. I just tried to do what felt right. That's all anyone can do." Sarah thought about that, about the choice she'd faced in this very room years ago, the choice between selling for easy money or fighting for something bigger, about the threats, and the pressure and the moments when giving up would have been so much easier. Marcus, can I tell you something? The night before I bought this house, I was ready to give up. Not just on finding a place to live, but on everything. I was so tired of fighting, so tired of losing. I thought maybe Emma would be better off without me. Maybe I should just disappear and let someone else take care of her. Marcus was quiet, letting her continue. Buying this house, opening that door, finding what was inside, it didn't just change my financial situation. It changed how I see myself. It proved that I could be brave, that I could make impossible things happen, that I deserved good things. That's the real treasure. Not the money, but the knowledge that I'm capable of more than I thought. You always were, Marcus said gently. You just needed proof. Sarah smiled. Yeah, I guess I did. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Sarah walked through Harmony House alone. Emma was upstairs doing homework. The mansion was quiet, filled with the gentle sounds of an old house settling, of wind through trees outside, of life being lived in spaces that had been empty for so long. She ended up in the entry hall, with a grand staircase curved upward, where light from the restored chandelier cast warm shadows on marble floors. This house had been abandoned, forgotten, feared. People had called it cursed, had warned her to stay away, had told her she was making a terrible mistake. But they'd been wrong. The only curse had been fear itself. Fear of the unknown, fear of taking chances, fear of opening doors that others had sealed shut. Sarah had chosen courage instead, had chosen to look past the warnings and the stories and the fear, had chosen to see potential where others saw only danger. And that choice, that single moment of desperate bravery, had changed everything. She thought about Elvis, about the man who'd bought this mansion for his family, who'd hidden his most precious work here, who'd trusted that someday someone would find it and know what to do. She thought about Janet, who'd sealed the music room and lived with the weight of that secret until it drove her to madness. She thought about all the people who'd owned this property over the years, who'd walked past that sealed door without opening it, who'd missed the fortune that waited behind it. And she thought about herself, about the struggling waitress with an eviction notice and a dream she'd given up on, about the mother who'd spent her last money on an impossible gamble, about the woman who'd opened a sealed door and found not just treasure, but redemption. The next morning, Sarah received a letter. It was from Elvis Presley, the woman who'd called to warn her about the estate's lawyers. Inside was a single page, handwritten, "Dear Sarah, I lied to you when I called. I'm not working for the estate. I'm Janet's daughter. I grew up in Harmony House. I watched my mother seal that music room, watch her spiral into paranoia and fear. She made me promise never to go back, never to open it, never to tell anyone what Elvis had hidden there. But I've watched what you've done, how you've honored the recordings, protected Elvis's legacy, used your discovery to help others. You did what my mother couldn't. You faced the fear, opened the door, and found light instead of darkness. Thank you for finishing what she started. Thank you for proving that some secrets are meant to be revealed, that some treasures are meant to be shared, and that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust ourselves to do the right thing. Elvis would have loved you. Mom would have too. With gratitude, Catherine." Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it in the archive with Elvis's correspondence. Another piece of the story, another thread in the tapestry of how Harmony House had saved her family and honored his. Emma found her there, in a library that had become Sarah's office. "Mom, there's someone at the door. She says she's a reporter from Rolling Stone. They want to do a story about the foundation." Sarah stood, brushing dust from her jeans. 5 years ago, she would have been terrified of this moment, would have felt inadequate, would have believed she didn't deserve the attention. But she wasn't that woman anymore. "Tell her I'll be right there," Sarah said. "And Emma, after this, you want to work on that song you've been writing? We could record a demo in the music room." Emma's face lit up. "Really? Like a real recording?" "Like a real recording. That room has held enough secrets. Time to fill it with new music." "Your music?" As Emma ran off, excited and chattering, Sarah stood in the library surrounded by books and history and the quiet weight of legacy. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about eviction notices and auction bids, about sealed doors and impossible discoveries, about $2,000 that had become $320 million, about fear that had become courage. She thought about the single mother who'd bought a mansion nobody wanted and found everything she needed. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she would make the same choice again. Because some treasures aren't found in vaults or sealed rooms. Some treasures are built through brave choices, through opening doors others fear, through believing that you deserve good things even when the world tells you otherwise. Sarah Mitchell had bought Elvis Presley's forgotten mansion. She'd opened a sealed music room. She'd found $320 million in lost recordings and treasures. But the real fortune wasn't the money. It was the life she'd built, the purpose she'd found, the proof that sometimes the most desperate gambles pay off in ways you never imagined. The music room at Harmony House still held treasures. There were recordings yet to be released, stories yet to be told, Elvis's voice still waiting to reach the world. But it also held something new, hope. Hope for other struggling mothers who thought they'd never get ahead. Hope for kids like Emma who deserved chances to chase their dreams. Hope for everyone who'd ever stood in front of a sealed door, afraid of what they might find, wondering if they had the courage to open it. Sarah had opened hers. And on the other side, she'd found everything. Not just treasure, but transformation. Not just fortune, but family. Not just Elvis's legacy, but her own. And that, she knew, was worth more than all the gold records and platinum albums and unreleased recordings in the world. Because anyone can find treasure if they're lucky. But it takes real courage to find treasure and use it to become the person you were always meant to be. To take brokenness and build beauty. To take fear and forge it into faith. To take a sealed door and turn it into an open future. Sarah Mitchell had done that. And every morning when she woke up in Harmony House, when she walked past the music room that had changed her life, when she watched Emma play piano in the space where Elvis once played, she remembered the most important lesson. The greatest treasures aren't found. They're claimed by people brave enough to bet on themselves, by people desperate enough to take chances, by people willing to open doors that everyone else is too afraid to touch. And sometimes, just sometimes, on the other side of fear is everything you've ever needed. The end. 10 years after buying Harmony House, Sarah Mitchell stood in front of a crowd of 5,000 people gathered in the newly constructed amphitheater on the mansion's grounds. The sun was setting over Memphis, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple that Elvis himself would have appreciated. Emma, now 21 and a graduate of Berklee College of Music, stood beside her mother at the microphone, confident and radiant in a way that made Sarah's heart swell with pride. "Thank you all for coming to the 10th anniversary celebration of the Harmony House Foundation," Sarah said, her voice steady and strong, so different from the trembling waitress who'd once been afraid to speak up for herself. "When I bought this mansion for $2,000 a decade ago, I was desperate, broke, and terrified. I had no idea that opening one sealed door would lead to all of this." She gestured to the grounds around them. Harmony House had been transformed beyond recognition. The mansion itself had been fully restored to its 1960s glory, every room meticulously researched and recreated. The grounds had been landscaped with care, the overgrown jungle replaced with walking paths, sculpture gardens, and performance spaces. The amphitheater where they now stood could hold 10,000 people and had become one of Memphis's premier music venues, hosting everyone from unknown local artists to international superstars, all proceeds going to the foundation's programs. "But this isn't really about me," Sarah continued. "It's about the 23,000 students who've gone through our music programs in the past decade. It's about the 15 recording studios we've built in underserved communities across the South. It's about the instruments we've donated, the scholarships we've funded, the lives we've changed by simply saying your dream matters, your voice deserves to be heard." That's what Elvis believed. That's what he would have wanted. And that's what we're committed to continuing. The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah scanned the faces, seeing students she'd taught, musicians who'd recorded in the studio, community leaders who'd partnered with the foundation, and there in the front row, faces she recognized from those early, desperate days. Marcus Chun, her music historian friend who'd helped her catalog the Elvis recordings, now serving as the foundation's chief archivist. Rebecca Chon, the entertainment lawyer who'd helped her negotiate with the Presley estate, now on the foundation's board of directors. Even Harold Grayson, the estate's lead attorney who'd initially threatened to destroy her in court, had become an unlikely ally and advisor. But the most surprising face in the crowd was the one she'd never expected to see. Sitting in the VIP section, wheelchair-bound but alert and smiling, was Catherine Presley, Janet's daughter, the woman who'd written that letter years ago. Sarah had tracked her down 3 years after opening the music room, and they'd formed an unlikely friendship. Catherine had shared stories about growing up in Harmony House, about Elvis's visits, about her mother's slow descent into paranoia after sealing the music room. She'd helped Sarah understand the weight of the secrets this house had held and the importance of finally releasing them. After the speeches, after the concert featuring Emma performing an original composition she'd written inspired by her childhood in Harmony House, after the crowds had dispersed into the warm Memphis night, Sarah found herself alone in the music room once again. It had been converted into a museum space, the original recording equipment preserved behind climate-controlled glass, selected Elvis recordings playing softly through hidden speakers, photographs documenting the discovery lining the walls. But in one corner, Sarah had kept a working studio, a space where new artists could record, where Emma composed, where music continued to be created in the room where Elvis had once poured out his soul. She sat at Elvis's piano, the same one she'd found covered in dust a decade ago, now restored and regularly maintained. Her fingers found the keys, playing a melody she'd been working on, something she'd started writing the night before the auction, a song about hope and fear and taking chances. She'd never finished it, had put it away when life became about survival rather than dreams. But lately, with financial security and time to breathe, she'd been returning to it, finding the words that had eluded her for so long. "You still play beautifully." The voice came from the doorway. Sarah turned to find a man in his 60s, silver-haired and distinguished, watching her with kind eyes. She recognized him immediately from photographs, though she'd never met him in person. Graceland's current director, Robert Hannigan, the man who'd taken over Elvis's estate management 5 years ago and had been instrumental in smoothing relationships between the foundation and the Presley family interests. "Mr. Hannigan, I didn't know you were still here," Sarah said, standing. "Please, call me Robert, and I wanted to wait until the crowds left. I have something I need to discuss with you privately." He entered the room, looking around with reverence. "I've been in this room dozens of times now, but it still gives me chills. Knowing Elvis sat here, created here, trusted his cousin to protect what he'd made." "What did you want to discuss?" Sarah asked, gesturing for him to sit. Robert settled into one of the chairs Sarah had placed around the room for visitors and pulled out a manila folder from his briefcase. "We've been going through the estate's archives, as we do periodically, and we found something unexpected. Documents that were misfiled decades ago, letters between Elvis and his business manager from 1973, a year after the music room was sealed." He opened the folder and handed Sarah several pages, yellowed with age but still legible. She recognized Elvis's handwriting immediately, more hurried than in the earlier letters she'd found, but unmistakably his. "Dear Colonel," the letter began, addressing Elvis's famous manager, Colonel Tom Parker, "I know you think I'm crazy for buying that second house and filling it with recordings you say aren't commercial. But I need you to understand something. The music I make for RCA, for the movies, for the Vegas shows, that's not all of who I am. That's the performer, the product, the thing people want Elvis Presley to be. But the music at Harmony House, that's me. The real me. The man who still loves gospel more than rock and roll. The man who's terrified of growing old. The man who knows this fame can't last forever and wants to leave something true behind." Sarah's throat tightened as she continued reading. "I'm not asking you to understand. I'm just telling you that when I'm gone, when all the pills and the pressure and the performance finally kill me, there's going to be something left that matters. Something real. I've set up a trust, separate from the estate. If anything happens to me, if the family can't hold on to Harmony House, if it gets sold or lost or forgotten, the trust will eventually make sure it ends up with someone who needs it. Someone who will understand why I saved those recordings. Someone who will know what to do with them." Sarah looked up at Robert, her eyes wide. A trust? He set up a trust. Robert nodded slowly. We found the paperwork. It was established in 1973, managed by a law firm that went out of business in 1989. The trust was supposed to maintain Harmony House's property taxes, but somewhere in the transition between firms, the payment stopped. That's why the county eventually seized the property for unpaid taxes. But the trust itself never dissolved. And according to the terms Elvis set up, if the property was ever sold at auction, the trust's remaining assets were to go to whoever bought it. Sarah's mind reeled. How much? How much is in the trust? After 52 years of compound interest, minus the legal fees we've spent tracking this down, approximately $8 million. And it's yours, Sarah. Elvis literally set up a trust that would eventually give money to whoever was brave enough or desperate enough to buy his forgotten mansion. Sarah sat down hard, the letters still clutched in her hands. $8 million on top of everything else. But it wasn't the money that made her emotional. It was a realization that Elvis had planned for this, had believed that someday someone would find Harmony House and would need help to preserve what he'd left behind. There's more, Robert said gently. In the trust documents, Elvis wrote a letter to be given to the buyer if the house ever sold. He wrote it in 1976, a year before he died. Do you want to read it? Sarah could only nod, her voice lost. Robert handed her a sealed envelope, yellowed and fragile. Across the front, in Elvis's handwriting, to whoever finds themselves at Harmony House. With trembling hands, Sarah broke the seal and pulled out several handwritten pages. She began to read aloud, her voice shaking. Dear friend, if you're reading this, it means Harmony House found its way to you. Maybe you're rich and bought it as an investment. Maybe you're a fan who wanted a piece of history. Or maybe, and this is what I'm hoping, you're someone like me. Someone who's struggled. Someone who's been knocked down and got back up. Someone who needs a second chance and is brave enough to take it when it comes. I bought Harmony House in 1966 because I wanted my family close but separate. I wanted them to have the security I'd earned, the comfort I never had growing up in Tupelo. But over the years, it became more than that. It became my sanctuary, the place where I could take off the costume, put down the burden of being Elvis Presley, and just be a man with a guitar trying to make sense of the world through music. Sarah paused, wiping tears from her eyes before continuing. The recordings I left in the music room, they're not my best work technically. Some of it's rough. Some of it's half-finished. Some of it's too personal, too raw, too real for the public that wants Elvis the entertainer. But it's honest. It's me without the myth. And I saved it because I believe that honesty matters, even in art. Maybe especially in art. If you found these recordings, you've got a choice to make. You can sell them for money. God knows they're probably worth a fortune by now. You can lock them away again, decide the world isn't ready. Or you can do what I hope you'll do. Share them. Let people hear that even Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was human. That I struggled with faith and doubt. That I was afraid of dying and desperate to mean something beyond the fame. That I loved gospel music and my mama and God. In that order. Sarah's voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. Use whatever money comes from this to help people. I've done my best while I'm alive, given what I can, but I know it's not enough. I know there are kids out there like I was, poor and hungry and full of dreams, who just need someone to believe in them. If my recordings can pay for music lessons, for instruments, for opportunities, then that's better than any gold record I ever got. That's the legacy I want. Not the jumpsuits or the movies or Graceland, but the music, the real music, used to lift people up the way music lifted me out of poverty. Whoever you are, whatever brought you to Harmony House, thank you. Thank you for taking a chance on a forgotten place. Thank you for opening doors that others were afraid to touch. Thank you for believing that what I left behind matters. You were meant to find this. I don't believe in accidents. I believe in fate, in God's plan, in things happening for a reason. You're holding this letter because you were supposed to. Trust that. Trust yourself. And know that somewhere, somehow, I'm grateful. With love and hope. Elvis Presley, March 1976. The silence in the music room was profound. Sarah sat holding the letter, tears streaming down her face, feeling the weight of connection across decades. Elvis had written to her, specifically to her, to the desperate woman who would one day need his forgotten mansion and his hidden recordings and his belief that she deserved good things. He knew, Sarah whispered. Somehow, he knew someone like me would find this place. Robert's eyes were wet too. Maybe he did. Or maybe he just understood struggle well enough to know that places like Harmony House find the people who need them most. Over the next few weeks, Sarah worked with Robert and the foundation's legal team to accept the trust funds. The $8 million was deposited into the foundation's endowment, ensuring that even if recording revenues eventually dried up, the music education programs would continue in perpetuity. But Sarah also made another decision, one that surprised everyone, including herself. She announced that she was donating half of her personal shares in the foundation's future recording revenues to establish the Janet Presley Memorial Scholarship, named after Elvis's cousin who had sacrificed her mental health to keep the music room sealed and safe. The scholarship would go to young women from struggling families who showed promise in music, giving them the opportunities Janet's daughter Catherine had been denied due to her mother's decline. Catherine, when she heard, wept openly at the next foundation board meeting. My mother lived with such guilt, such fear, she said, her voice trembling. She thought she'd failed Elvis by sealing that room. She thought the secrets would destroy everything. To see her name honored this way, to see her sacrifice recognized and turned into something positive, it would have meant everything to her. The Janet Presley Memorial Scholarship's first recipient was a 15-year-old girl from North Memphis named Destiny Williams. Like Sarah had been, Destiny was being raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs. Like Sarah, Destiny had a voice that gave people chills and dreams that seemed impossible. When Sarah handed Destiny the scholarship certificate, along with a check for full tuition to any music school she wanted to attend, she saw herself 20 years earlier, the woman she could have been if someone had believed in her sooner. Don't give up on your dreams, Sarah told Destiny, gripping her hands tightly. Even when it seems impossible, even when everyone tells you to be practical, your voice matters. Your art matters. You matter. Destiny's mother, standing nearby, caught Sarah's eye. The recognition was instant, that understanding between mothers who fought impossible battles to give their children better lives. No words were needed. The gratitude and hope were clear in her tears. But not everything in Sarah's life had been smooth. The success of Harmony House and the foundation had brought challenges she'd never anticipated. There were people who resented her fortune, who believed she'd gotten lucky and didn't deserve what she'd found. There were distant Presley relatives who'd emerged from nowhere, claiming they should have inherited the mansion and its contents. There were fans who believed the recordings should be free, that charging for them was exploiting Elvis's memory. And there had been threats. 3 years after opening the music room, Sarah had received a letter that made her blood run cold. It was from a group calling themselves the True Elvis Legacy Preservation Society, claiming that Sarah was defiling Elvis's memory by releasing recordings he'd wanted kept private. They demanded she stop all releases and turn everything over to them, or face consequences. Sarah had taken the letter to the police, who'd investigated but found nothing concrete. The threats had seemed to stop, until 6 months ago, when someone had broken into Harmony House's archives. They'd bypassed security, disabled cameras, and accessed the climate-controlled vault where the original master tapes were stored. Nothing had been taken, but someone had touched the tapes, had left behind fingerprints that didn't match anyone in the system. It was a message: we can reach you. We can touch what you treasure most. Since then, Sarah had tripled security, installed state-of-the-art systems, and even hired a private security team. Emma, despite Sarah's protests, had learned self-defense and carried pepper spray. The joy of the discovery had been shadowed by the constant awareness that not everyone celebrated what they'd found. On a Tuesday afternoon in late October, exactly 10 years and 3 months after buying Harmony House, Sarah was working in her office when her assistant rushed in, face pale. "Sarah, you need to see this. Someone's posted something online about the foundation." Sarah pulled up the link on her computer and felt her stomach drop. It was a blog post on a conspiracy theory website titled "The Truth About Sarah Mitchell and the Stolen Elvis Legacy." The post was long, detailed, and completely fabricated. It claimed Sarah had known about the music room before buying the house, that she'd bribed county officials to keep the auction quiet, that she'd stolen recordings and sold them on the black market, that the foundation was a money-laundering scheme, that she'd threatened the Presley family to extort settlement money. Every accusation was a lie, but they were written with enough specificity to sound credible. And they were spreading. Within hours, the post had been shared thousands of times. News outlets picked it up, framing it as allegations surface without bothering to verify anything. Social media exploded with judgment. People who'd celebrated Sarah's story now questioned everything. Death threats appeared in her email and on the foundation's social media pages. Sarah sat in her office, watching her reputation crumble in real time, feeling helpless and betrayed. Emma found her there at midnight, still staring at the screen, reading the hate comments and accusations. "Mom, stop. You know none of this is true." "But they don't know that," Sarah said hollowly. "And in today's world, the accusation is enough. Truth doesn't matter anymore." Emma pulled up a chair and took her mother's hands. "Then we make it matter. We fight back with facts. We show receipts, documentation, everything. We tell our story louder than they tell their lies." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and her team launched a counteroffensive. They released every document related to the house purchase, the discovery, the negotiations with the Presley estate. They published financial records showing exactly how foundation money was spent. They filmed testimonials from students whose lives had been changed by the programs. They showed the letter from Elvis, the trust documents, the proof that this was exactly what he'd wanted. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Legitimate news outlets issued corrections. Former students rallied on social media, sharing their stories with the hashtag Harmony House Changed My Life. Musicians who'd recorded at the foundation came forward to defend Sarah's character and integrity. The conspiracy theories didn't disappear. They never completely do, but they lost their power. The truth, backed by evidence and character witnesses, prevailed. But Sarah learned something crucial in those dark weeks. Success made you a target. Goodness didn't protect you from lies. And sometimes, doing the right thing meant accepting that not everyone would understand or appreciate it. 3 months later, on a cold January morning, Sarah received a call from Robert Hannigan. "You need to come to Graceland. There's something you need to see." Sarah drove across Memphis with Emma, both of them curious and slightly nervous. They'd been to Graceland dozens of times for meetings and events, but Robert's tone had been different, urgent, but also excited. They were led not to the usual conference rooms, but deep into Graceland's private archives, sections not open to the public. Robert waited for them in a climate-controlled vault, surrounded by boxes and filing cabinets. "We've been digitizing Elvis's personal papers," he explained, "and we found something remarkable. A box that was marked Harmony House. Do not open until 2025. Sarah's breath caught. 2025? That's this year. Exactly. Elvis wanted this box sealed for 48 years after his death. We don't know why that specific timeline, but he was very clear in his instructions. The box could only be opened in 2025 and only in the presence of Harmony House's owner. Robert gestured to a metal box on the table, about the size of a small suitcase, with a combination lock that had already been opened. "We used the code Elvis left in his instructions, but we haven't looked inside. This is for you." Sarah approached the box slowly, Emma beside her. Together, they lifted the lid. Inside were several items, each wrapped in protective cloth. Sarah carefully unwrapped the first one and gasped. It was a guitar, a beautiful acoustic with mother-of-pearl inlays, clearly custom-made and obviously well-loved. A small envelope was tied to the neck. Sarah opened it and read aloud. "This was my first good guitar. Not the first one I ever owned, but the first one I bought after I made enough money to afford quality. I played this guitar on my first recording session. I wrote, 'Love Me Tender' on this guitar. I played it the night I proposed to Priscilla. This guitar knows all my secrets, all my hopes, all my fears. I'm leaving it at Harmony House because that's where the truest music lives. Whoever owns the house in 2025, play this guitar. Write songs on it. Let live again. Don't put it behind glass. Music isn't meant to be looked at. It's meant to be lived. Emma's hands trembled as she took the guitar from her mother. She ran her fingers over the strings, which somehow, miraculously, were still in tune. She played a chord, and the sound that filled the vault was pure and clear and almost heartbreakingly beautiful. "Mom," Emma whispered. "This is the guitar." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. They unwrapped the next item. It was a leather journal, thick and worn, with Elvis's name embossed on the cover. Sarah opened it carefully. Inside were hundreds of pages of handwritten lyrics, song ideas, poems, sketches, and personal reflections. This was Elvis's creative process, documented in real time over what looked like several years. "This is invaluable," Robert breathed. Scholars have speculated about his writing process for decades. This could answer so many questions. But Sarah was focused on the final item in the box. It was smaller, wrapped in silk that had once been white but had yellowed with time. She unwrapped it slowly, carefully, and found a small wooden box, simple and unadorned. Inside the box was a cassette tape, the kind that had been popular in the 1970s, with a handwritten label. "For the future, Elvis, March 16, 1977. That was 4 months before Elvis died. Sarah looked at Robert. "Do you have a way to play this?" 20 minutes later, they were in a private listening room, the cassette loaded into a restored vintage player. Sarah, Emma, and Robert sat in silence as the tape hissed to life. Then Elvis's voice filled the room, but not singing. Talking. "If you're listening to this, it's 2025. I'll have been gone for 48 years. That seems impossible to me right now. 48 years is longer than I'll have lived by the time you hear this. I'm recording this because I need to say some things, and I need someone in the future to hear them. I'm tired. God, I'm so tired. The pills, the pressure, the performances, it's all catching up with me. I know I'm not going to live to be old. I can feel in my body. I'm only 42, but I feel like I'm 80. Sarah's eyes filled with tears at the weariness in Elvis's voice. "But I don't want to be remembered as the guy who died on a bathroom floor, fat and addicted and pathetic. I want to be remembered for the music, for the joy, for the way I tried to lift people up. That's why I've been saving the real recordings at Harmony House. That's why I've been so careful about what I release commercially versus what I keep private. Because I know that after I'm gone, people are going to want to pick me apart, to examine every flaw, to turn my life into a tragedy. But if there are recordings, real recordings of me at my best, creating just for the love of it, then maybe that's what they'll remember instead." Elvis paused, and they could hear him taking a shaky breath. "Whoever you are, listening to this in 2025, thank you for caring. Thank you for finding Harmony House and for valuing what I left there. Thank you for understanding that artists are human, that we struggle and fail and get back up and try again. I hope the world has changed since my time. I hope there's less war, less hate, less judgment. I hope music still matters. I hope people still believe in dreams. And I hope whoever found my recordings used them well. Use them to help people the way music helped me. That's all any of us can do, really. Use what we're given to make things better for someone else. That's the legacy that matters. Not the gold records or the sold-out shows, but the lives we touch, the people we lift up, the difference we make." There was a long pause, and then Elvis began to sing, just his voice and acoustic guitar, no production, no arrangement. He sang a gospel hymn his mother had loved, his voice raw with emotion and faith and the certain knowledge that his time was running out. When the song ended, there was silence. Then Elvis spoke one final time. "Remember me kindly. Forgive my mistakes. And if you ever feel like giving up on your dreams, remember that a poor kid from Tupelo became the king of rock and roll. Anything is possible. Anything. God bless you, whoever you are. I hope you're happy. I hope you're loved. I hope you're creating beauty in whatever way you can. That's what matters in the end. Not fame or fortune, but love and beauty and truth. Don't forget that. Please don't forget." The tape clicked off. In the listening room, all three of them sat in stunned silence. Elvis had recorded a message to the future, to them, speaking across nearly 50 years of death and distance and change. And his message was simple. Keep creating, keep hoping, keep believing. Sarah wiped tears from her face and looked at Emma, who was openly sobbing. "He was saying goodbye," Emma whispered. "He knew he was dying, and he was saying goodbye to people he'd never meet." "Yes," Sarah said softly, "and he was telling us that what we're doing matters, that we're honoring his legacy the right way." Robert cleared his throat, composing himself. "This tape, if you're willing, should be shared with the world. Not sold, but released free. Let people hear Elvis speaking from the heart. Let them understand who he really was." Sarah nodded immediately. "Of course. This isn't about money. This is about truth." The release of Elvis's final tape became international news. It was posted free on the Harmony House Foundation website, accompanied by an explanation of how it was found and why Elvis had sealed it for 48 years. Within 24 hours, it had been listened to by over 50 million people. Within a week, over 200 million. People around the world heard Elvis's voice speaking to them across time, sharing his struggles, his hopes, his humanity. And something remarkable happened. The message sparked a global conversation about legacy, about how we remember artists, about the difference between the public persona and the private person. Musicians came forward to share their own struggles with fame and addiction. Mental health advocates used Elvis's words to talk about the importance of seeking help. Parents played it for their children, talking about dreams and perseverance and staying true to yourself. And donations to the Harmony House Foundation exploded. Within a month, they'd received over $20 million in small donations from people around the world who wanted to be. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the necklace. "I can't accept this. It's too precious, too personal. That's exactly why you should have it. You've given my family's legacy a home, a purpose, a future. This is my way of saying thank you. Wear it. Remember what it means. And know that somewhere, my grandfather is smiling at what you've built." After Riley left, Sarah stood in the music room holding the necklace and thinking about connections across time, about how a poor waitress from Memphis could end up holding a piece of Elvis Presley's family jewelry, could end up being entrusted with his legacy, could end up maturing in a story that began long before she was born. That evening, Sarah and Emma sat on the front porch of Harmony House, watching the sun set over Memphis. The mansion glowed behind them, lights warm in every window, music drifting from the studios where students were recording. The gardens were full of people walking, talking, creating. Harmony House had become exactly what its name suggested, a place of harmony, of peace, of artistic creation and community gathering. "Mom," Emma said quietly, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't bought this house? If you'd been too scared to bid, or if someone else had bought it instead?" Sarah considered the question. "Sometimes, I think we'd probably be okay. I'd have found some other way to survive. But we wouldn't be this. We wouldn't have found our purpose. We wouldn't have discovered that we could be more than survivors. We could be thrivers, creators, legacy builders." Do you think Elvis somehow knew it would be you? Like fate or destiny or whatever? I don't know if he knew it would be me specifically, but I think he trusted that Harmony House would find the right person. Places have energy, Emma. They call to the people who need them. This house was waiting for someone desperate enough to take a chance, brave enough to open sealed doors, and stubborn enough to fight for what they found. That happened to be me. Emma was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad it was you. I'm glad we found this place. I'm glad we opened that door." "Me too, baby. Me too." The following year brought changes Sarah had never anticipated. The foundation expanded beyond music education to include programs for at-risk youth, housing assistance for struggling families, and support services for single mothers. Sarah created the Sealed Doors Initiative, a program that identified and helped people who felt trapped in impossible situations, giving them resources and support to find their own Harmony House, literally or metaphorically. The program helped hundreds of families avoid eviction, find employment, and build stability. But Sarah's proudest accomplishment was the completion of the Harmony House Recording Art School, a fully accredited institution offering free education in music production, engineering, performance, and business. Students from underserved communities could attend on full scholarship, receiving the same quality education as expensive private music schools, funded entirely by the foundation. The school's first graduating class of 50 students achieved remarkable success. 32 were hired by major recording studios or production companies. 8 started their own independent labels or production businesses. 6 were signed to recording contracts as artists. And 4 chose to stay at Harmony House, joining the foundation staff to help the next generation of students. Emma was among those who stayed. She completed her degree at Berkeley, but realized her heart was at Harmony House, teaching, mentoring, showing kids from backgrounds like hers that they could achieve their dreams. Watching Emma lead a songwriting workshop, Sarah felt a fullness in her heart that no amount of money could buy. But perhaps the most unexpected development came in the form of a phone call from the Library of Congress. They wanted to name the Elvis Presley collection at Harmony House a National Historic Treasure, one of only a few dozen private music archives to receive the designation. The honor came with federal protection, substantial grant funding, and recognition that what Sarah had preserved was culturally significant to the nation. The ceremony was held at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. Sarah stood on stage, accepting the award, looking out at an audience that included members of Congress, the Librarian of Congress, representatives from the Smithsonian, and the Presley family's current estate managers. "When I bought Harmony House for $2,000, Sarah said in her acceptance speech, I wasn't thinking about history or legacy or cultural preservation. I was thinking about my daughter and where we would sleep. But I learned that sometimes the best discoveries come from desperation, that sometimes running out of options forces you to take chances you'd never otherwise take." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Elvis Presley understood something fundamental about America. He understood that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. He understood that poverty doesn't mean lack of ability, just lack of access. And he understood that the luckiest people are those who get a chance to share their gifts with the world. That's what this collection represents, not just Elvis's music, but his belief that everyone deserves a chance. Everyone deserves to be heard. Everyone deserves to dream. The applause was thunderous. But Sarah wasn't finished. "I accept this honor not for myself, but on behalf of every struggling parent who's ever bought something they couldn't afford in hopes it would save them. On behalf of every person who's been told they're crazy for taking a chance. On behalf of everyone who's opened a door they were warned to leave closed and found treasure on the other side. Your struggles matter. Your courage matters. Your dreams matter. Never forget that." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She returned to her hotel room and found herself thinking about the journey, about every step that had led from eviction notice to national recognition. She thought about the woman she'd been, terrified, desperate, convinced she was failing her daughter and herself. She thought about the risks she'd taken, the doors she'd opened, the battles she'd fought. She thought about Elvis's letters, his music, his faith that someone would understand and honor what he'd left behind. And she thought about legacy, about what we leave behind when we're gone. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She would write a book, not about finding treasure or becoming wealthy, but about the journey from poverty to purpose. She would write about fear and courage, about mother and daughter, about sealed doors and the decision to open them. She would write about Elvis as a human being, flawed and struggling and trying to do good. And she would write about the lesson she'd learned most clearly, that treasure isn't found, it's recognized. That value isn't inherent. It's created by people willing to see potential where others see only decay. The book, titled Sealed Doors, Finding Fortune in the Places We Fear, became a bestseller within weeks of publication. But more importantly, it became a movement. Sarah received thousands of letters from people who'd read the book and been inspired to take their own chances, to open their own sealed doors, to stop letting fear make their decisions. A woman in Detroit bought an abandoned community center for back taxes and turned it into an arts program for homeless youth. A man in rural Oregon purchased a closed-down school and created a technology training center for his struggling town. A single mother in Phoenix bid on a storage unit and found antique jewelry that funded her daughter's college education. The stories came from everywhere, people taking chances, finding value, building legacies. And Sarah realized something profound. Harmony House had never really been about Elvis's music or her financial success. It had been about permission. Permission to believe you deserved good things. Permission to take chances. Permission to open doors that others said should stay closed. Permission to build something meaningful from something broken. That was the real treasure. Not the recordings or the money or the recognition, but the knowledge that change was possible, that courage mattered, that one person's choice could ripple outward and touch lives they'd never meet. 5 years after the Library of Congress ceremony, 15 years after buying Harmony House, Sarah stood in the music room one last time before embarking on a new adventure. Emma was pregnant with Sarah's first grandchild, a little girl they planned to name Hope. The foundation was thriving, with programs in 17 states and expansion plans for international work. The Elvis recordings had all been properly archived, digitized, and slowly released over the years, each one carefully curated and contextualized. Harmony House itself had become a pilgrimage site for music lovers worldwide. But Sarah had decided it was time to step back, to let younger leaders take over, to spend time with her daughter and coming grandchild, to finally, after 15 years of constant work, rest. She'd appointed a new executive director for the foundation, a former student who'd grown up in poverty and now held a doctorate in music education. She'd established an endowment that would fund operations for decades. She'd set up succession plans and governance structures. Her work was complete. She sat at Elvis's piano one final time and played the song she'd started writing the night before the auction, the song she'd finally finished years later. It was called Sealed Doors, and it told the story of a desperate woman who bought a haunted mansion and found not ghosts but grace. Not curses but courage. Not fear but freedom. As she played the final chord, Emma appeared in the doorway, hand resting on her pregnant belly. "That was beautiful, Mom." "Thank you, baby. Are you sad to be leaving?" Sarah considered the question. "No, I'm not leaving. I'm just making space for what comes next. This house doesn't need me anymore. It has a life of its own now. But that's how it should be. We build things so they can outlast us, so they can grow beyond us. That's what legacy means." Mother and daughter stood together in the music room, surrounded by history and possibility, and Sarah thought about the final line in Elvis's 1976 letter, the one that had guided everything she'd built. "Remember me kindly. Forgive my mistakes. Create beauty in whatever way you can." She'd done that. She'd honored his memory, forgiven his humanity, and created beauty from broken things. What more could anyone ask for? As they walked out of Harmony House that evening, Emma locked the door behind them. But it wasn't really an ending, Sarah knew. It was just another door closing so others could open. Somewhere out there, another desperate person was standing at another auction, looking at another impossible chance. Somewhere, another sealed door waited to be opened. Somewhere, another treasure waited to be found by someone brave enough or desperate enough or crazy enough to take the risk. And when they did, when they opened that door and found what waited behind it, they'd understand what Sarah now knew in her bones. The greatest treasures aren't found in mansions or vaults. They're found in ourselves, in the moment we stop running from fear and start running toward hope. In the moment we open the door we've been warned to leave sealed. In the moment we bet our last dollar on an impossible dream. That's when we find our Harmony House. That's when we discover who we're really meant to be. That's when the treasure finds us. 20 years after buying Harmony House, Sarah Mitchell stood in the Memphis Music Hall of Fame, preparing to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award. At 55, she looked different from the desperate waitress who'd once counted pennies and feared eviction. Her hair was silver now, worn long and elegant. Her hands, once rough from endless work, were softer but still strong. Her eyes held wisdom earned through struggle and triumph, through fear faced and conquered, through doors opened and treasures shared. Emma sat in the front row, 31 years old and radiant, holding 2-year-old Hope on her lap. Beside them sat Hope's father, Daniel, a music producer Emma had met at Harmony House 5 years earlier. And next to Daniel was someone who made Sarah's heart swell with unexpected joy. Marcus Chun, now 72, still working as the foundation's chief archivist, but also for the past 3 years, Sarah's partner. They'd fallen in love slowly, carefully, two people who'd spent so long focused on work and purpose that romance had seemed impossible until suddenly it wasn't. The presenter, a famous musician whose career had been launched by a Harmony House scholarship 15 years earlier, spoke about Sarah's impact. In 2 decades, the Harmony House Foundation has educated over 50,000 students. It has released 147 previously unheard Elvis Presley recordings, each one carefully curated and contextualized. It has funded programs in 43 states and 12 countries. It has proven that one person's courage can change not just their own life, but thousands of lives across generations. Sarah walked to the podium, Marcus squeezing her hand as she passed. She looked out at the audience, seeing faces that told the story of Harmony House. Former students who are now Grammy winners, teachers who've been trained in the Foundation's programs, community leaders who've been inspired by the Sealed Doors initiative, Presley family members who've become friends and collaborators, and scattered throughout, people she didn't recognize but who were here because somehow, in some way, her story had touched theirs. "Thank you for this incredible honor," Sarah began, her voice steady and clear. "But I need to be honest with you. I'm not special. I didn't have some unique gift or vision or talent that set me apart. What I had was desperation, stubbornness, and a daughter I loved more than I feared failure. That's it. That's the whole secret." She paused, letting the words sink in. 20 years ago, I had $1,247 to my name. I was being evicted. I was working 3 jobs and still falling behind. I was convinced I was failing as a mother, as a person, as everything. And then I saw an auction listing for a mansion nobody wanted, and I did something crazy. I bet everything on an impossible chance. Sarah's voice grew stronger, more passionate. But here's what I've learned in 20 years. We're all standing in front of our own Harmony House. We're all looking at our own sealed doors. We're all facing our own impossible choices. The question isn't whether you'll find treasure. The question is whether you'll have the courage to look. Whether you'll be brave enough or desperate enough or foolish enough to take the chance when everyone else says don't. She looked directly at Emma and Hope. "My daughter grew up in that mansion, playing in rooms where Elvis Presley once walked. My granddaughter takes her first steps on floors that held 50 years of secrets. But the real legacy isn't the house or the recordings or the money. It's the example. It's showing them that women like us, women who start with nothing, can build everything." The applause began, but Sarah raised her hand. She wasn't finished. "I want to tell you about a letter I received last week. It was from a woman in rural Kentucky, a single mother working at a truck stop, raising 2 kids on minimum wage. She wrote to tell me that she'd read my book 3 times, that she'd been inspired by my story, and that she'd just done something crazy. She'd used her tax refund to buy an abandoned church that was being auctioned for unpaid taxes. $500. She bought it for $500, and she's turning it into a community center, a place for kids in her town to go after school, to be safe, to learn, to dream." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears. She said she didn't know if she'd find treasure like I did. She said she was terrified she'd made a mistake. But she said my story gave her permission to try. And that's when I realized something. The treasure I found at Harmony House wasn't Elvis's recordings. The real treasure was discovering that I mattered, that my choices mattered, that my courage could ripple outward and give other people permission to be brave. That woman in Kentucky, she's my legacy. Every person who reads my story and decides to take a chance, they're my legacy. Every sealed door that gets opened because someone believed they deserved to know what was inside, that's my legacy. The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. But Sarah was already thinking about what came next, about the work still to be done, about the doors still sealed, about the people still standing at their own impossible auctions, trying to decide whether to bet everything on a dream. After the ceremony, at the reception, Sarah found herself surrounded by well-wishers and admirers. But the person she was looking for was a young woman she'd spotted in the back of the auditorium, standing alone, looking overwhelmed and out of place. Sarah excused herself from a conversation with the Memphis mayor and made her way through the crowd. "Hi," Sarah said gently. "I'm Sarah." The young woman looked up, startled. She was perhaps 23, with tired eyes and work-worn hands that Sarah recognized immediately. "I know who you are," the woman said. "I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't have come. I don't really belong here. Why did you come?" The woman hesitated, then pulled out a worn, dog-eared copy of Sarah's book. "I've read this 17 times. I have it memorized, and I just needed to see you in person to know that it's real, that someone like us can actually make it." Sarah felt her heart clench. "What's your name?" "Jasmine. Jasmine Rodriguez." "Tell me your story, Jasmine." And Jasmine did. She was a single mother of a 4-year-old son, working as a night cleaner at a hospital, barely making rent on a one-bedroom apartment in a bad neighborhood. She had a voice, had always had a voice, had dreamed since childhood of being a singer. But life had other plans: an abusive boyfriend, an unplanned pregnancy, a family that had disowned her for keeping the baby, and years of just surviving, just getting through each day. "But your book," Jasmine said, voice shaking. "It made me think maybe it's not too late. Maybe I could still chase the dream. I've been saving $5 here, $10 there, and I have almost $300 now. There's an open mic competition next month, $50 entry fee, and the winner gets a recording session at a real studio. I was going to enter, but then I thought, what if I'm not good enough? What if I embarrass myself? What if I waste that $50 that could buy groceries instead?" Sarah looked at this young woman, saw herself 20 years earlier, saw the same fear and hope and desperate courage. "Can I tell you something?" Sarah said. "The night before I bought Harmony House, I almost didn't go to the auction. I stood in my bathroom at 3 in the morning, looking at myself in the mirror, calling myself every kind of fool. I was going to spend my last money on something everyone said was worthless. I was terrified." "What made you go?" Jasmine asked. "I looked at my daughter, sleeping, and realized that fear was already taking everything from us. My job, my dignity, my dreams, my security. Fear had already won. The only question was whether I'd let it take my courage too. And I decided no. Fear could have everything else, but it couldn't have that. It couldn't stop me from trying." Jasmine wiped tears from her face. "But what if I fail?" "Then you fail having tried. And that's a different kind of person than someone who fails without trying. One is a tragedy. The other is just life teaching you what you need to learn next." Sarah pulled out her phone. "Give me your number." 2 weeks later, Jasmine stood on stage at the open mic competition, her 4-year-old son in the front row with a babysitter Sarah had arranged and paid for. Jasmine sang an original song about struggling and surviving and refusing to give up. Her voice was raw and powerful and absolutely heartbreaking. She didn't win first place. She came in third. But Sarah, sitting in the back of the venue with Marcus, knew that placement didn't matter. What mattered was that Jasmine had opened her sealed door. She had taken her chance. She had shown her son that dreams were worth fighting for. After the competition, Sarah approached Jasmine backstage. "Third place isn't first," Jasmine said, trying to smile through obvious disappointment. "No, it's not," Sarah agreed. "But I have a question for you. The Harmony House Recording Art School has a scholarship program for mature students, people who are coming back to music after life got in the way. Would you be interested in auditioning?" Jasmine's eyes went wide. "I can't afford full scholarship. Tuition, books, even a stipend for living expenses and childcare. You'd have to work hard, commit to the program, but if you're serious about your music, we're serious about helping you develop it." 6 months later, Jasmine was enrolled at Harmony House, her son in the Foundation's daycare program, her voice being trained by some of the best vocal coaches in Memphis. Sarah watched her progress, saw her confidence grow, saw her talent bloom, and felt something profound. This was why everything had happened. Not so Sarah could be rich or famous or honored, but so she could be the person for Jasmine that no one had been for her. So she could open doors that had been sealed. So she could say to someone drowning in fear and poverty and hopelessness, "You matter. Your dreams matter. I believe in you." On a warm spring evening, exactly 21 years after buying Harmony House, Sarah sat on a mansion's front porch with Marcus, watching the sun set over Memphis. They did this often now, this quiet ritual of watching day become night, of reflecting on where they'd been and where they were going. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, holding Sarah's hand. About, about legacy, about what we leave behind. We've done so much, built so much, helped so many people. But I wonder sometimes what happens when we're gone. Will Harmony House continue? Will the program survive? Will the story keep inspiring people? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I used to worry about that, she finally said. Used to lie awake at night, terrified that it would all fall apart after I was gone. But I don't worry anymore. Why not? Because I've learned that the best legacies aren't the ones we control from beyond the grave. They're the ones we plant in people's hearts and then let go. Every student we've trained, every person we've inspired, every door we've helped someone open, those are seeds. And seeds grow in ways we can't predict or control. That's the beauty of it. Marcus smiled. You become very wise in your old age. I'm 55, not ancient. Wise nonetheless. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Inside the mansion, Harmony House was alive with activity. Students in the recording studios, a board meeting in the conference room, a youth choir practicing in the great hall. The house was fulfilling its purpose, just as Elvis had dreamed it would, just as Sarah had fought to make possible. Do you ever regret it? Marcus asked suddenly. Regret what? Taking the chance. All the stress, all the fights, all the threats and lawsuits, and sleepless nights. Do you ever wish you'd just taken the easy road, sold everything to the estate, walked away with a few million, and lived quietly? Sarah considered the question seriously. Not for a single second, she said finally. Every hard moment, every terrifying decision, every battle fought, it all led to this. To 50,000 students educated. To a foundation that will outlive me. To a granddaughter who will grow up knowing that her grandmother opened sealed doors and found treasures worth sharing. To women like Jasmine who see my story and decide to write their own. How could I regret any of that? Even the death threats? Even the conspiracy theories? Even the years of barely sleeping because you were so worried about protecting everything? Even those, Sarah said firmly, because they taught me that anything worth building is worth fighting for. They taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to keep going despite it. And they taught me that I'm stronger than I ever knew. Marcus pulled her close, kissed her temple. You're the bravest person I've ever known. No, Sarah corrected gently. I'm just the most desperate person who got lucky. But I've learned that sometimes desperate and lucky is enough. The next morning, Sarah received an email that made her sit down hard in her office chair. It was from the Nobel Committee's Peace Prize division. They wanted to nominate the Harmony House Foundation for the Nobel Peace Prize, recognizing its work in using music education to bridge economic divides, heal communities, and empower marginalized populations. The nomination wasn't a guarantee of winning, but it was in recognition of the global impact the foundation had achieved. Sarah read the email 3 times, then called Emma. You're not going to believe this, she said when her daughter answered. After explaining, Emma was silent for a long moment. Mom, do you realize what this means? A Nobel Peace Prize nomination? People will study your story in schools. Historians will write about you. You'll be remembered forever. No, Sarah said softly. Harmony House will be remembered. The students will be remembered. Elvis's music will be remembered. I'm just the woman who was brave enough to spend $2,000 on a haunted mansion. That's all I ever was. That's everything, Emma corrected. That's the whole point. You were just a struggling waitress, and you changed the world. That's the most inspiring part. After hanging up, Sarah sat in her office, surrounded by photographs documenting 21 years of work. Pictures of Harmony House before and after. Pictures of students, thousands of them, faces bright with hope and possibility. Pictures of Emma growing up in these halls, of Hope taking her first steps in the music room. Pictures of ceremonies and concerts and quiet moments of teaching and learning. And in the center of her desk, in a simple frame, the letter Elvis had written in 1976, to whoever finds themselves at Harmony House. She read it again, as she had hundreds of times, and felt the connection across decades, across death, across impossible odds. Elvis had trusted that someone would find his mansion, would open his sealed music room, would understand what needed to be done. And somehow, impossibly, miraculously, that someone had been her. A broke waitress from Memphis with an eviction notice and a dream she'd given up on. "Thank you," Sarah whispered to the photograph of Elvis that hung on her wall, the one showing him young and hopeful, guitar in hand. "Thank you for leaving the door sealed until I was ready to open it. Thank you for trusting that someone like me could honor what you built. Thank you for teaching me that treasures aren't found, they're recognized." That evening, at dinner with Emma, Daniel, and Little Hope, Sarah made an announcement. "I've decided to write another book," she said. "Not about finding Harmony House or opening the music room. A different book." "About what?" Emma asked. "About what comes after the treasure. About the 21 years since that day. About the work and the struggles and the joy of building something that matters. About the students and the programs and the ripple effects. About the real legacy, which isn't the fortune, but what you do with it. About doors that open after you've opened the first one." Marcus smiled. "That's the book the world needs. Everyone wants to hear about finding treasure. Nobody talks about the responsibility that comes with it." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "Because that's the part they don't tell you in fairy tales. They end at happily ever after and never show you that happily ever after is actually just the beginning. It's 21 years of work. It's choosing every single day to honor the gift you've been given. It's understanding that finding treasure isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the real one." Little Hope, not quite understanding the adult conversation, but sensing its importance, banged her spoon on her high chair and shouted, "Treasure!" Everyone laughed, and Sarah thought about how her granddaughter would grow up hearing this story, would grow up understanding that ordinary people could do extraordinary things, would grow up knowing that sealed doors were meant to be opened and treasures were meant to be shared. The Nobel Prize nomination didn't result in a win, but it didn't need to. The recognition itself brought renewed attention to the foundation's work, resulted in partnerships with organizations around the world, and inspired the creation of similar programs in 6 other countries. The Harmony House model, using music education funded by cultural preservation, became a blueprint for social change through art. And Sarah, at 56, found herself busier than ever, traveling, speaking, consulting with new programs, but always returning to Memphis, to Harmony House, to the sealed music room that had started everything. On the 22nd anniversary of buying the mansion, Sarah did something she'd been planning for months. She gathered everyone who'd been part of the journey. Emma and her family, Marcus, the foundation staff, former students, board members, Presley family representatives, and one special guest, Jasmine Rodriguez, who'd just released her debut album to critical acclaim. They stood in the entry hall of Harmony House, and Sarah unveiled a new plaque that would be mounted beside the front door. Harmony House. Built 1959. Purchased by Elvis Presley, 1966. Forgotten, 1972. Rediscovered, 2004. A reminder that sealed doors are meant to be opened, that treasures are meant to be shared, and that one person's courage can change the world. Enter with hope, leave with purpose, and never stop believing in the possibility of magic. As everyone applauded, Sarah felt Marcus's arm around her waist, felt Emma's hand in hers, felt hope tugging at her skirt, and knew with absolute certainty that every risk had been worth it. Every terrifying moment, every impossible choice, every sealed door she'd had the courage to open. Because this was the real treasure, not the millions in the bank or the recordings in the vault or the awards on the wall. But this moment, surrounded by people whose lives had been changed because one desperate woman had bet everything on an impossible dream and won. And somewhere, somehow, she knew Elvis was smiling. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.